Hello, my name is Solveiga. I'm an industrial designer from Lithuania, although I mostly grew up in the UK, and that's actually where I finished design school at Brunel University in London. I'm now the founder and director of a company called Mimica. I'm really interested about things that get repeated on a daily basis all around the world and end up affecting really big things. Expiry dates are one of these things, and to varying degrees, we do have blind faith in them. And this is a problem because 60% of the food that we throw away currently in the UK is still perfectly edible. Doesn't that feel wrong to you? It's no wonder that these foods get wasted because the system hasn't been thought about from a design-centered perspective at all. In fact, when expiry dates were introduced, they were not really intended for the purpose that we are using them for today. In 1973, Marks and Spencer's introduced sell-by dates just for their employees to know when to rotate stock so that they can say that they have the freshest food. Consumers started noticing this and were looking at them, so then they made the dates much bigger and made it a kind of advertising point. Very quickly, the other supermarkets started copying, and then the UK government stepped in and legislated it. But what they mandated was that the expiry date has to exist, but the way it's calculated is still, to this day, not regulated at all, which is why we end up wasting so much. We're now in the situation where legally food producers must display a date, but the way those dates are calculated is still completely unregulated. And as it's impossible to know which consumer is going to keep their food properly and which one is going to keep it out of the fridge, the date is set at the worst possible scenario in order to protect consumers. That makes sense, right? But it doesn't really make sense when most of us are keeping our food correctly and we end up throwing away perfectly good food. How I got to thinking about expiry dates is a bit unusual, and I want to tell you that story. It all actually started with blind people. I was, during my year in industry, I was working at a design consultancy, and I was put on a 6-month project with a blind charity, and it was all about public transportation. So on my travel observations on trains, we had a lot of time to chat other than about the study. So it was an opportunity for me to get really nosy about some of the everyday tasks in our lovely participants' lives. So I was asking all sorts of things from how do you know how much milk to put in your coffee, very important, and how do you get dressed without having a completely uncoordinated outfit. And for all of these questions, they had really cool answers and hacks or gadgets that were helping them. But one thing that nobody could answer when I was asking it is, how do you know when your food spoils? And it was a real problem because without this kind of access to this information, they were forced or felt forced to buy less fresh foods and buying foods that were longer life and in their eyes less risky. But these types of processed foods, they were having the expected negative health consequences for them, and it was a huge problem. So I decided to, when I got back to my final year at university, to make this the topic of my project. I've always really been interested in inclusive design, and as soon as I started thinking about the project, I realised that we're all kind of blind to when our food really spoils, which is why we waste so much, and that's why we're sniffing our milk like this. And this is a huge sustainability issue as well. Food waste is one of the major contributors to climate change, and if food waste were a country, it'd be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world after China and the US. So, how was I going to start solving this problem? Well, I actually got inspired by quite an unusual thing. One day I was looking at an old banana and, it was telling me something. Its skin was changing, it was getting bumpy and dark. You could tell that the banana was not as fresh as it used to be. And I wondered, gosh, what would happen if our packaging was able to do the same thing? And then I had visions of a package that starts crumpling and getting gross and bumpy, and you would just know not to eat that food product anymore. And so I started to investigate, how can I actually make this a reality? So, you know, from that blue sky vision, I had to scale it down a little bit. So then I was like, okay, what about a label that turns, you know, from smooth to bumpy at exactly the right time? Really interesting things happen when you take a multidisciplinary approach. In this case, it was design and science, because when you blend different expertises, you can consider different things and some really cool stuff can happen. And I'm really pleased that I looked outside of the field of design. I was going to need some outside expertise from the field of science, chemistry, because I really needed to understand food spoilage and what materials I could use to mimic that at the right time. I started working with a chemist and I was telling him all of my crazy concepts, and he was suggesting to me that I look at the field of gels. Gels are really amazing because they have some unique properties, being temperature sensitive and changing their structure at the right time. And I thought these are some really interesting properties that I can play with to create various texture changes. So I started a whole series of experiments. Many of them failed, of course, you know how design is, of you trying to use gels in different ways and playing with the kind of different formulations to see if I can make one type of gel more temperature sensitive than the other, because that's how food is, right? You know, milk is going to be more temperature sensitive than a piece of steak. So I was making sure that this is what I was going to be able to achieve. And in the end, I'm happy to say that after quite a few months of development, I was able to create a solution that worked every time. And I ended up coming up with a solution which was a label that tells you exactly when food spoils according to when the bumps appear, and it's affected by real temperature conditions. This is what the first version of the product looked like when I first graduated, but since then I've actually started my company called Mimica, and the design has evolved a lot since then, as you can see. So it's now called Mimica Touch, and the really cool thing is that through all the iterations that we've been through as a company as well, the interaction is still the same. All you need to do is run your finger across it, and if it feels smooth, then it means that your food is still fresh and safe, and only when you feel bumps, that's when you know it should no longer be consumed. That's really easy to understand, and it's really inclusive still, so I'm proud that we've kept that very important part of it. Why did I decide to start a company in the first place? You know, I could have just gone into a design career, and actually that's what I thought I would do. But I entered the concept into the James Dyson Award, and to my absolute surprise, I ended up winning the UK version of the award, which brought a lot of press, and companies were very interested in working with me on a pilot. And at first I was thinking, gosh, this is just a concept, what are you talking about? But then I realized that I had the opportunity to bring something that was going to create a positive change in the world, and I kind of owed it to everyone else to make it happen. I now run a multidisciplinary team at Mimica, which is still with the same approach, and a real satisfaction in creating not just a solution that can help the world, but also a really great place to work that's led by our mission and our values. The team has helped improve the design, make the gel formulation scientifically accurate to different types of foods, and I've even brought in a CEO to help me run the company, because as a designer, you know, if you start a company, you shouldn't feel bound to that CEO role. You can definitely bring in great leaders who can help you deliver your vision. It's taken a few years to develop what is groundbreaking technology, and we're now at the stage where we've achieved what's called a minimum viable product that's ready to kind of test in the food industry. We've been working with some of the largest food companies in the world, and unfortunately today I can't name any of them, but I hope very much that soon the secret will be out and I'll be able to share that with you. Turning my final year design project into a science company is definitely something I never thought I would do, but now I can't imagine doing anything else. The impact that Mimica can have is extraordinary, and my main message to you as designers is to leave as few great concepts that can improve society on paper. do think about taking that leap forward and making it reality. I think you owe it to the rest of us to make it happen. Good luck.